Good afternoon. This is the December 9th, 2019 Bellingham City Council committee meeting. This is one committee this afternoon. This is Committee of the Whole. Our first item is a presentation by the City Council's Climate Action Task Force. On May 7th, 2018, City Council adopted the 2018 Climate Action Plan. Council also passed Resolution 2018-06, establishing the Climate Action Task Force with the direction to determine the feasibility of achieving accelerated greenhouse gas reduction ambitions. Task Force members volunteered over 1,000 hours, during the last 14 months, including holding 16 Task Force meetings, which were open to the public. The Task Force recommendations include measures that expand those of the Climate Action Plan, as well as the new measures not currently addressed in the Climate Action Plan. The Task Force will present an overview of their work and their recommended measures, and I want to just provide a reminder that Council will not be taking public comment this afternoon, but welcomes public comment at tonight's meeting. And here to take us through is Eric Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Hamel. Mr. Hamel, members of the council. As you can tell, there are a significant amount of interest from the community into this particular topic today, and we're happy to be here to have the conversation. The city, as you well know, is well engaged in responding to climate change. We have for many, many years been addressing as we're able to climate action. With adoption of the 2018 Climate Action Plan and the formation of this task force to report to the council today on their recommendations to go even further than we already have. We certainly could spend some time going through all of the things that we currently are doing. I think it's suffice to say that we are doing a number of things to move us forward to climate action. I will mention one if I could today. I noted about a month ago the State Patrol announced they had bought 3 hybrid police interceptor vehicles. We've already ordered 12. So in sense of the things that we're doing some things very, very well. It's exciting today to have this conversation about things that we could do more. And before we turn over to Mark for the presentation, I would like to mention that we do have recommended action for the council today as part of the packet. And that action is to return to the council in January with a comparison between the task force recommendations and the existing plan that was adopted by the council. Would also recommend that the council form a specific council committee, a standing committee, to take this topic up in 2020. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark Gardner from the council office. But as I do that, I want to acknowledge and recognize the efforts of all the members of the task force and the staff who've contributed toward this effort and appreciate their efforts in doing so. So, Mark.
Good afternoon. Mark Gardner, legislative analyst for the Bellingham City Council. You'll be relieved that I will not be presenting for an entire hour. I'm just going to introduce the task force members, and then they will take you through the report. But I wanted to provide a quick overview of the task force itself, the process, and the report, and then I'll let them take it from there. So just as a quick outline, these are the topics we'll go over, pretty self-explanatory. They're more or less the order of things right in the report itself. So that's what we'll be doing today, and I'm doing the introduction. The team is our great task force members who've put in a phenomenal amount of time and energy into this process, and we're lucky to have people with such expertise and willingness to contribute to the community. The other part of the team is Colchin Services. They provided facilitation, ClearPath, greenhouse gas emissions modeling, just innumerable things to help the process along. And I think that if we hadn't had them, we'd probably be coming to you today to say, give us some more time. So that's how critical they were. We also had some additional assistance from Patrick Shive of Western Washington University. He's a graduate student, and he provided some assistance with energy supply and the marginal cost analysis. And staffing this committee were myself, Renee LaCroix, and Claire Fogelsong. Just to remind you that, I'm sure you don't need reminding, but just to read out explicitly the ambitions from the resolution. Those are that the task force should seek to come up with measures that would achieve 100% renewable energy for city facilities, electricity, heating, and transportation by 2030, 100% renewable energy use for the Bellingham community's electricity supply by 2030, and 100% renewable energy for community heating and transportation by 2035. So those are the ambitions from the resolution. I want to note that the task force took this work very seriously. We took it literally as if you wanted us to try to do this, and that's why you're seeing some very robust and ambitious measures to match the ambitions. I want to note that 100% is not a very forgiving number. To get there, many recommendations will require many more resources, including additional analysis and research, staffing, financing, community partners, and in many cases, a regulatory backstop to ensure that we achieve some endpoint by some particular date. Current rates of adoption are just not fast enough to achieve those ambitions. I think these ambitions are pretty ambitious in the broad spectrum of global climate change, but cities are moving in this direction, trying to accelerate such goals, and it does require a movement past business as usual. I want to note that the task force was not able to achieve 100% renewables community-wide. As you've seen in the report, and there'll be some discussion of this later, there's a large industrial energy wedge that we were not really able to get a handle on it, in part because some of the producers of that, users of that energy are covered by confidentiality agreements. We don't know exactly who they are, but also there's a breadth of situations that need further analysis, and that's also in the report as a recommendation to look into that further. And I want to note that there are a number of measures that were examined, but which had small climate benefits and high costs. So we have dropped those from the outset. So we've not been able to achieve the 100% yet, but we've got a pathway forward to move you strongly in that direction. Just briefly to describe the work of the task force, we were convened in the fall of 2016. There were 16 meetings total of the task force. The task force members bring significant expertise to this project and devoted many hundreds of hours of work to it. The task force heard presentations from about a dozen local and regional experts, and we put those on the website. A lot of them are quite informative, so I encourage anybody who hasn't seen those to take a look. Work groups are set up for major areas of analysis, including buildings, transportation, and land use, and energy supply. Lastly, we had a separate technical group to complete the greenhouse gas reduction and cost analysis. And the work groups met as needed starting in the spring and consulted with many additional local and regional experts. That's a broad overview of the work. Public information. All 16 task force meetings were open to the public. Presentations were recorded and aired numerous times on BTV. Public comment page was set up and the comments were sent to task force members. Comment was taken at the end of every meeting. A web page was maintained with links to presentations and videos, etc. Additional opportunities for public input and involvement will occur in 2020 as the council considers these measures. We did attempt to have as much public involvement as we possibly could given the technical nature of this committee and the speed at which we had to proceed. So we had a start at that process, and we know it will continue in 2020 as the city considers some of these measures. Methodology, the resolution asked us to use a triple bottom line plus technology methodology, and possible measures were analyzed using a framework encompassing environmental, social, technological, and equity considerations. The first screen, however, are the measures technically feasible? And the answer in all cases is yes, they are technically feasible. In many cases, the technology is changing rapidly, costs are dropping, and the difficulty sometimes is keeping up with the rapidity of innovation in this area. So I wanted to mention that just this morning I saw at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which compiles global analyses of energy investment. They were noting that renewable and clean energy investment has hit $300 billion globally for the last 5 years. So that's how much money is going into this area, and why it's an exciting time to be looking at these types of things, because innovation is accelerating and costs are going down. I also wanted to note that if we saw something that was implemented successfully elsewhere, that's a sort of prima facie assumption that it's possible because it's already happening somewhere else. And if it's happening many, many different places, that shows it's easier to do. It doesn't mean you can necessarily import something straight over from some other country or city or whatever, but it does indicate that a program or a recommendation is possible. However, I want to note that in some cases, the triple bottom line analysis is very preliminary. I think the largest reason for this is there's 50 measures, and it took quite a while to produce those measures and do some initial screening and analysis. But the idea of being able to really dig in and have full in-depth triple bottom line analysis in the amount of time we had and the amount of resources we had is essentially impossible. But that's what we'll turn to next year if council directs us to continue to pursue these. And also, I want to note that you have to get some program design before you can really analyze all the costs and benefits and distribution of costs and benefits and how effective a program will be. And so we need to get to that level to dig deeper. So this is a process that's really just starting. There's also some dependencies between measures. For example, some measures would be financially feasible if other measures for financing or technical assistance are available. Some are included because they're very promising, even though not enough information is available to complete the triple bottom line. And there's some interesting proposals from PSE to look at, for example, Green Direct, which would possibly be a source for renewable energy for the entire community. But the source of that energy is not determined. The UTC hasn't approved that program. It would need to be discussed with the city. We'd need to look at the cost, but that is so promising that we definitely included that as a measure. But there's many like that where we've introduced a set of concepts or ideas that will need further analysis. And in general, time and resource constraints precluded the full scoping of some promising measures, but we did include a number as areas for further study. That's the recommendation. Look into this. It's not to do this, it's rather to look into this, and a number are like that. And the bottom line is that every measure selected for further consideration will need additional analysis, especially an examination of affordability and equity issues. And on that, I just wanted to close with a note that if we look at something and there's extremely large benefits at very, very low cost, that's a no-brainer, and we want to do it. If there's very small benefits and huge costs, that's a no-brainer. We don't want to do it. And a lot of things are going to fall in the middle where there's real benefit, but it takes some work to design a program such the impacts are not disparate, so we don't disrupt the economy and we don't disrupt affordability. But it's possible to design around a lot of these affordability issues, and that would be a large part of what the work would be in the next year or so to make sure that that any measures that are adopted are fully vetted and that they're equitable in their distribution of costs and benefits, and that they're not disruptive to the local economy or housing market. So that's just an overview of the methodology. And I just want to mention now the upcoming presentations. We'll start with buildings, followed by transportation, then land use, energy supply, marginal cost analysis, and then wrap up next steps. I want to note that Derek Long is unfortunately not able to come today, but Don Goldberg is going to pick up his section there. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Erin McDade to do the buildings section for us now.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present this today. As Mark said, my name is Erin McDade, and I work for the organization Architecture 2030. We're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to decarbonize the global building sector, since the building sector is the single largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally. And so while my work on this task force has been on a volunteer basis, one of the initiatives that I've been working on for the past 4 years through my work at Architecture 2030 is an initiative to help 11 cities across North America develop policy pathways to 100% decarbonization of their building sectors. So that has brought a lot of knowledge and analysis experience that's been incredibly relevant to the work that we're doing here. So I'll start by highlighting the piece of the emissions wedge that is buildings, which is the piece that the buildings working group took on that I led. So we can see from the report that if you combine the residential and commercial emissions, then the building sector as a whole represents 43% of our city's total emissions. And so that makes buildings the biggest emitter in the city. And in order to have an analytical framework around which to develop the recommendations that are in the report and that I'll be presenting to you, I completed a really in-depth, robust analysis of our city's building stock at a building-by-building level, looking at use type, floor area, energy consumption by fuel type, and emissions, and looking at both the current state of that and then projecting that out to the year 2035, which is our target year, of course. And so while there was a lot of information that came out of that analysis, there were a few really critical data points that really framed the work that we created in the report. And so I'm going to highlight those quickly. And as a note, all the following charts are assuming in the year 2035 we have made no actions, we've made no changes, so business as usual. So they show what we need to tackle in order to achieve our 100% renewable ambitions. So the first chart shows that in a business as usual scenario, assuming we've reached 2035 with no changes, 83% of our total emissions from the building sector will be from existing buildings. So this highlights the fact that we really need to address both existing and new buildings in our measures moving forward. It also shows that 65% of the total emissions will be from small buildings. So while big buildings are critical, big buildings are typically bigger emitters, we have such a huge stock of small buildings, particularly single-family homes, that it'll be critical for us to address both big and small buildings. And finally, the two predominant fuel types, of course, used in all of our buildings are electricity and natural gas. Assuming no changes, 58% of the emissions will be from natural gas, 42% from electricity. I will note that this does assume that our electricity grid is on path to meet the 100% clean energy by 2045 target. Since this is 2035, we still see some emissions from electricity. That's why that wedge is there. So again, using those key data points, we built out a set of measures. And I will say that there's another key framework around which to build building sector policy measures, and this is consistent for all cities across North America that I've analyzed, across Europe that my colleagues have analyzed, and it's pretty critical. And I call it the three-legged stool plus, and the implication there is that without any one of those legs, the whole thing is not successful. So the first critical piece of the stool is energy efficiency. And among many reasons, this is important because it significantly reduces building energy demand, which then allows for smaller, cheaper systems to be installed, and also, of course, reduces utility bills, which is a critical equity perspective. Then the second piece is electrification, and that looks at taking care of that natural gas emissions wedge. And also the electric equipment that is currently being installed in buildings today is so efficient and so much more efficient than natural gas equipment that it also reduces energy demand and reduces utility bills, so resulting in the ability to install smaller systems. And then finally, renewable energy, and this is critical because that electricity wedge, like I said, still exists, and we want to take care of electricity emissions as well. And then in Washington State, this is great because our utility grids have to get to zero anyway, and so the more renewable energy that the building sector installs on site or procures, the more it's helping that transformation to 2045 speed up. And then I called this the three-legged stool plus. And that's because, as Mark alluded to, it's going to be critical to have financing and technical assistance support to implement all of these measures the most successfully from an equity and a carbon perspective. And so, again, just to reiterate, electrification is arguably the most critical thing that we need to do in terms of climate change. There's been a lot of conversation in the past about natural gas being a bridge fuel because it's cleaner than coal, but recent robust scientific research indicates that because natural gas is methane is 28 times more impactful from a climate change perspective than carbon dioxide, and because of all of the emissions that happen during fracking, during distribution, and during combustion on site, natural gas is actually as bad, if not worse, for the climate than coal. So electrification from a climate perspective, critical, but from an equity and social well-being perspective, all of these have to be implemented together. So we have built our measure recommendations that are outlined in the report under those 4 categories, and I will highlight what those are quickly. So the first one is energy efficiency. We are recommending weatherization measures for owner-occupied residential buildings that were constructed prior to 1990. And this is because it is more likely that buildings built prior to 1990 are in need of energy efficiency upgrades rather than those that were built with later building codes and are therefore more efficient. A similar but different set of weatherization measures for renter-occupied residential buildings. This is because renter-occupied conditions are different than owner-occupied conditions. I'll get to that a little bit in a different slide. And then finally, for those large buildings, to address that large buildings piece of the pie, we have a set of upgrades and retro-commissioning measures. And then the electrification recommendations are for existing buildings at the point of equipment replacement. So when the current space or water heating system dies and needs to be replaced anyway, that replacement is done using efficient electric equipment. And then our recommendation is that for new construction, immediately all new construction is fully electrified, whole building. For the renewable energy measures, we're recommending a pathway with 3 different options. The first one is that on-site solar will be installed on 50+% of the available area, and so that could include roof area or other area on site, such as a parking lot. Or the building owner could choose to buy into a community solar installation somewhere, and again, this would be for 50% plus of the total energy consumption of that building. Or, and again, this is something Mark alluded to, we recommend that we work with PSE or other options to create a Green Direct or similar program so that owners can simply check the little box on their electricity bill and they can buy into a renewable energy program. And we also strongly recommend that this be offered at low or no additional cost, no cost premium to low-income residents. And then finally, the financing and technical assistance. We have a long section in our chapter outlining this. We recommend that there's an electrification and renewable energy technical assistance program developed, that there's the development of a Bellingham Clean Energy Fund to help support the financing of some of these measures, and that there's a program set up to identify and promote additional financing sources, of which there are many in place. And just to quickly address some of the conversation that's been going on before these measures have been presented, there are many things that are not part of or included in or necessary for the measures that we're recommending. So the first one, as is clear by our renewable energy pathways, is that solar panels will not be required on all rooftops. None of these measures would ever require the update or replacement of an existing roof. None of them would require the installation of new windows. They do not require the removal of existing gas stoves or fireplaces. And finally, none of them would ever require the reconstruction or replacement of building foundations. So going beyond carbon, of course, this was our primary criteria as Mark identified, but we did have a mandate to look at this through a triple bottom line perspective. And so there are many key components of each of these measures that would be required for a successful implementation for both a climate and an equity perspective. And again, I'll highlight some of them now, but these are heavily detailed in the report. So the first for energy efficiency is that there need to be no cost pathways for low-income residents. And then the second, and this gets back to why we have different measures for renter-occupied buildings, there's a common problem called the split incentive, where owners do not have an incentive to pay for an upgrade without passing that cost on to their tenants. And this needs to be addressed. There are mechanisms for addressing it that have been implemented in other cities. And finally, for all of our energy efficiency recommendations, we are recommending that they are only required if they are cost effective, which would mean they'd have a return on investment within a short period of time for the owners or the occupants. For electrification, we recommend that the city support or join with other cities in the Puget Sound region to co-do a study on the incremental costs of the electrification measures that we're recommending in order to help the city understand how much financing would be necessary under those financing and technical assistance programs to offset the critical costs. And then the installation of efficient electric systems is critical. There are types of electric space and water heating systems that are so inefficient that they would increase utility bills. And then there are types, the ones more commonly used today, that are up to 3 times more efficient than traditional equipment. And so it would be very important to make sure that those more efficient types are being installed. Similarly, as for energy efficiency, we highly recommend that there are no-cost pathways for low-income residents for the renewables, and that, again, gets at that Green Direct, potentially offering no cost premium. And then for the financing and technical assistance measures, it's going to be critical to identify reliable sources of financing and not just sources of financing that like a one-time grant or a federal program that might disappear, so that there can be confidence in the consistency of these financial resources. And we looked at many options, many exist beyond this. Quickly to name a few, there's on-bill financing, tax incentives or credits, PACE loans, the Bellingham Clean Energy Fund that we discussed, and then state and private loan programs. And to close out, while the carbon benefits, the renewable or the GHG benefits of all of these measures are undeniable and will result in us getting very close to a 100% renewable building sector, there are countless co-benefits as well that are really positive and shouldn't be forgotten in the process of considering this. And so for energy efficiency, we've touched on this. It reduces energy costs, and that's obvious why that's a positive for all of us. And then again, allows for the smaller and therefore cheaper equipment to be installed. And energy efficiency measures also improve comfort and indoor air quality, so they make the quality of our living and the quality of our workspaces significantly higher. And that if the measures that we propose for energy efficiency are implemented as we propose them, they will result in significant local job creation. Electrification similarly should reduce energy costs. The data on this is less strong than it is on energy efficiency, but all of the research out there indicates because the equipment is so much more efficient, it should lower energy costs as well. And then electrification has a significant impact on indoor comfort and air quality. Combusting natural gas in our homes and our buildings is one of the most dangerous things we can do from a community safety perspective, and it also has significant adverse effects on health, raising asthma rates in children up to 42%, among many other impacts. And so electrification is arguably one of the most important things we can do today to improve community safety and public health. And then renewable energy increases building resilience, especially in the face of increasingly extreme weather and natural disasters. And then adding renewable energy to electrification measures decreases demand on the electricity grid, which is one of the main considerations and concerns with electrification, that it will create such a heavy demand that the electricity grid will not be able to meet that. And so if electrification is coupled with a renewable energy measure, then it helps mitigate that problem while helping the grid achieve its 2045 clean energy goal more quickly. And again, significant local job creation. Bellingham's already a hub for this, and it'll just increase. And then the financing and technical assistance measures, as we've outlined them, we see strong potential for them to bring new financial resources into the community, which is good for the economy for us all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rick Nicholson. I had the honor of being on this task force by virtue of having a 30-year career at Whatcom Transportation Authority, WTA, the last 15 years of which as the Director of Service Development. And before I get started on my slides, I just want to give a shout out seriously to the city staff that helped us with this, Mark, Renee, and for the transportation group, especially Claire Vogelsong. These three folks were instrumental in us being able to do any of this, thanks to your leadership. And so I just wanted to make a conscious shout out about that. And also Colson Services as well, and the facilitation was tremendous. And with that, I will dive right in. So the transportation measures, in some ways I feel like, well, number one, I need to say that the transportation subcommittee of this was really Christine Grant, who you're going to hear from in a little bit on another topic, and myself, and Claire Vogelsong. in some ways, I feel like we had almost the easiest piece of this puzzle in terms of trying to present the options to you, and I'll get to why that is here in a second. But what I'm going to go over here in the next few minutes is why these particular measures were chosen, the ones that I'm going to go over, the approach that was taken, that will need to be taken to implement them, and how the measures are grouped in the task force recommendation and the report that you have, and then some suggestions for funding. We have 21 different measures in this transportation sector. I'm not going to go through every 21, so that's why we're going to group them and just kind of hit the highlights. So why these measures were selected? Well, in the Climate Protection Action Plan, which the city put out last year, 32% of the carbon footprint in Bellingham and for community emissions are transportation related. So about a third of the footprint has to do with transportation. And over 99% of that currently, of the vehicle miles, are driven by internal combustion engines, fossil fuels. So that's pretty straightforward. The transportation carbon footprint is tied to internal combustion engines. Therefore, City Council greenhouse gas reduction ambitions that you have can only be reached by phasing them out on Bellingham streets. This can be in conjunction with reducing private vehicle trips. So this is mode share, which is something that the city has a long-standing mode share goals of trying to reduce single occupant vehicle use. City, WTA, many others, Council of Governments have been working on these I've been working on them for the last 20 years at WTA. But trying to change mode share by itself will not get us there. This is a fundamental point. It really is the number one section up there, phasing out internal combustion engines, that is going to get you anywhere near the ambition that you asked for us to take a look at last year. And this is really the key kind of slide on the transportation presentation. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go over it. It's very busy, I get that. But this is really looking at some different options for trying to reduce the transportation carbon footprint, just to some of the options. But I'm going to start at the top and work my way down for all those colored lines. The line on top is basically what's going to happen if we don't do anything. This is the current carbon footprint for transportation, and then if you extrapolate that out for the next 20 years or so based on population growth, then you just have increasing carbon dioxide, which is the left-hand axis here, tons of CO2. You have just increasing emissions, which is to be expected. And then you see three lines there, yellow, red, and green, which are different possible mode share strategies, mode share shift strategies that the city could do, some of which are included in other aspects of our presentation, of our report, and some are not. But so I want to just highlight those because those are substantial. Those three within that little black box up there, any one of those is a substantial ask. So the first one, or the one, let's see, the red one there, is if we had 75% of all new housing units in the city of Bellingham between now and 2035 be in urban villages, so 75% in dense urban areas, that would lower, because more people would be able to walk to where they need to go or bike, would be less need for vehicle trips. That would lower what would otherwise be the carbon footprint. The red line is, just to remind me, no, the yellow line, I'm sorry, the red line is urban villages. The yellow line is if we were able to increase the bicycle mode share from what is about 4% now, and the city has a goal, a stated goal of trying to get that up to 12% by 2035. If we were able to do that, triple the amount of people, the percentage of people riding bikes, that's the yellow line. So it also is lower than the baseline, the blue line. And then the green line is a measure that we have in our transportation section, and that is the unbundling of parking. So what this is about is for people who pay rent, When we pay rent, we pay a lump sum to the landlord or the property management folks, and that is for our unit and, if we have a car, a parking space typically. The idea is to unbundle that. So people who don't own cars aren't paying that portion of their rent for parking because they do not need parking. They don't own a car. And so if we're able to do that, presumably that would lower the cost of rent, and the studies have shown that it can lower the cost by up to 17% of rent for people who don't own a car. This is a social justice issue right here, or at least an incentive for people to not own vehicles, especially if they're low income. If all three of those measures were taken, each, right, then it's the orange line down, about halfway down the page there. 3 mode share strategies combined. We're starting on the far left-hand side in 2019. If you go out to 2035 and we do all 3 of those mode share strategies that I just talked about, we're basically treading water. It's basically the same amount of carbon dioxide output into the atmosphere annually based for transportation as we have now. We have simply mitigated the population growth in that time. You then go down to the teal line there, that kind of light blue line, and that is if we implemented a strategy to phase out internal combustion engines. EV there, all EV, electric vehicles. If we were able to phase out internal combustion engines kind of just over time, that gets us down to, well, much, much lower than the other 3. There's still some carbon footprint because not all of the electricity is going to be generated by clean sources by 2035. That's something that will take a little longer. The purple line below that is if all vehicles became electric and we did the 3 mode share strategies. So you can see the small difference between doing the mode share strategies and electric vehicle versus just electric vehicle. The bottom line in all of this is, again, just reiterating, is that just like Aaron was talking about with buildings, it's all about electrification and transportation if we want to reduce the carbon footprint for this section of our society. What approach is going to get us there? And as I mentioned, I've had a career at WTA, and for the last 20 years or so was actively involved, along with many folks here at the city, along with the Council of Governments, along with Western Washington University, at trying to do this very thing, trying to reduce single-occupant vehicle trips. And a lot of work has been done by a lot of people. And from 2000 to 2014, all of the work that we all collectively have done reduced the single-occupant vehicle rate by less than 2%. So it had some impact, but not much. Incentives alone don't do much. That's the bottom line. Disincentives alone is going to feel punitive for folks, and it's going to create just greater resistance. So to me, it is a truism, it is an absolute kind of fact that we have to be willing to do both carrots and sticks. And so of the 21 measures that the transportation section has here, they're about equally divided between things that are incentives versus disincentives. And again, I'm not going to go through them one by one, but that has been part of the conscious philosophy behind this. So in the report, the transportation measures are broken out into 4 different sections. Measures 1 through 8 are transitioning to using electricity as a fuel for most transportation. The next 4 measures are recommitting to meeting the city's existing mode shift goals. The next set of measures has to do with reforming city parking policies. And then the last 3 are just suggestions for potential ongoing funding streams. And again, without getting into the details of each one, but just some of the key takeaways from those 4 sections. For transitioning to electricity, one of the key points is that electric vehicles are about 3 times as efficient as converting energy to forward motion as fossil fuels. For fossil fuels, most of that energy is heat that just dissipates into the atmosphere. Electricity is much more efficient. Electric vehicle options are growing rapidly. There were only approximately 3, at least in the Bellingham area, 3 electric vehicle options 9 years ago. Globally, anyway, there's like 45 now, and it's growing every year. It's just tremendous variety now. And many other cities and counties have agreed to phase out, and ICE is the acronym for internal combustion engines, have agreed to phase out internal combustion engines in the next 10 or 15 years. This is not something that we're creating out of thin air. In the report we show, we have a list of countries and cities throughout the world that have at least as a goal, to do this exact same thing. We're not inventing this. And there needs to be access to charging stations at residences. This is going to be a key factor, which a number of our measures point to. The next set of measures, recommitting to meeting the city's mode shift goals. Some of the key takeaways are, it seems to us that biking has the greatest potential for growth of the non-auto modes. Funding for education and encouragement, and this includes some greater funding for the Smart Trips program, an existing program through the Council of Governments. But more education and encouragement for non-fossil fuel modes of transportation. And then our active transportation network needing to be completed. So this really is updating the bicycle master plan, the pedestrian master plan, and just getting coordinating and kind of fast-tracking all that can be done to increase non-auto mode share. The next set have to do with reforming city parking policies, and one of the key takeaways is that people who don't own cars shouldn't be subsidizing people who do. And there's a lot of ways in which that does happen now. Another key fact is that parking is not free. In one way or another, we all pay for parking, but it shouldn't be treated as such. Even where a fee is charged in the city of Bellingham, the revenue generated doesn't even pay to maintain the city's parking system. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, unbundling parking from rent can substantially lower monthly expenses for people who don't own vehicles, and has been shown to reduce vehicle miles traveled substantially. Lastly, ongoing potential funding streams. Again, not going to go into the specifics, but just the fact that it's going to take a significant and sustained effort to implement the City Council's ambitions, and that many of the measures we're suggesting we recognize are going to take expanded funding and more than likely staffing. In conclusion, Mark touched on this earlier, but again, we don't see that there is any technological reason why the city can't succeed in meeting or nearly meeting the 2035 ambitions for transportation. The societal impediments to implementing meaningful measures will be substantial, and they are. So the commitment to facing these impediments must be equally substantial. And then this next one is really critical. We have to remember that this climate crisis will affect low-income persons much more than the affluent. Folks with money will be able to figure out a way to accommodate what's going to happen. Those at the low end of the spectrum, globally and locally, are going to be dealing with this much more than those of us that have a decent income. This is a social justice issue, along with an environmental issue. Plus, electric vehicles are cheaper to fuel and maintain. And lastly, again, I just want to thank City Council for creating these ambitions that allowed us to present these to you, and look forward to helping in any way we can in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Aaron, too. I wanted to just say thank you for your presentation. I just got handed a note from our communications team. For those who are watching this presentation online or at home, BTV is having some technical issues that prevents viewers from seeing the slides, and we'll have this back available as soon as possible, and sorry about the inconvenience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Don Goldberg, the Director of Economic Development for the Port of Bellingham and Whatcom County. Appreciate being part of this whole conversation. Before going into my presentation, I did want to make note that and emphasize that the region is already benefiting from a green economy, with many companies like Silfab, Alpha Technologies, BP, Philips, who are already working on the next generation of energy supply and of a really profound effect on our economy today and as we move forward. So remember that a green economy does not have to necessarily cost us money. I also want to thank Derek Long, who I'm going to be presenting for. He picked up the flu this morning, so it's a last-minute deal. So I apologize if this first section I'm not that practiced in. So, so land use section is our next section. It's about compact development and having more densification closer into the city. So on this slide, I'd like to start by reflecting on what we've been doing nationwide for the past several decades. This paragraph from the Urban Land Institute summarizes it perfectly. 25% of our increase of vehicle miles traveled is due to population growth. Many people think it's all related to that. 75% is actually due to sprawl. Sprawl not only increases vehicle miles traveled, but it also removes farmland, forest land, which are capable of sequestering carbon. We reference these three key studies frequently while generating our recommendations. For these studies, compact development is considered to be 11 to 15 dwelling units per acre. Bellingham's base average is 6.3 units per acre right now, and at least 60% of the new growth must be obtained in the 20% in order to obtain the 20% reduction. Much more opportunity is captured when a significant percentage of new growth goes into more dense downtown and urban village areas at 30 units per acre or more. Fairhaven currently has an average of 21 units per acre and is looking better all the time. As you can see from this picture, it shows low-rise, dense housing. We feel that the same model would be beneficial for the downtown region. This slide, this kind of development will get us much closer to the 20% emissions according to the ULI study. Many refer to this density level as middle or the missing middle because it's relatively rare new development type in our cities and towns. There's quite a bit of this that if you go up to Vancouver on your way to downtown, they're doing a lot of infill with this type of development. The level of density, design, and character can fit very well into transition zones between downtown and urban villages and is less dense than single family. Current zoning regulations don't facilitate this kind of development in many places. So these are some graphs that were created. This is a snapshot of our current zoning and how much of Bellingham's land is dedicated to each major type of use. So you can see currently, by far, we have single-family housing zoning at 44%. The type of zoning that we're talking about is the second one, which is multi-tenant at 18%. So these graphs go into these asterisks note urban villages. And so the first one is parks, if you had urban villages close to parks. The next one is schools. The following one is public transport. And then the last one is grocery stores. And so we feel that areas that are close into these areas should potentially get incentives for denser construction. This last graph is, or map shows if you overlay all four of those, what the type of zoning would allow. Excuse me, wrong slide. And a conservative estimate would be that we would add between 1,000 and 2,000 units if we densified as the slide shows. So the next part of this presentation is on pedestrian malls. And pedestrian malls are an amazing addition to areas. They're the most common form of zoning for pedestrians. They're typically streets that are lined with storefronts or closed off to most automobile traffic. Emergency vehicles and full-time access to delivery is always available. As cities become more walkable and pedestrian-friendly, they experience increased inner-city retail activity due to larger numbers of pedestrian and bicyclists replacing automobiles. In addition, when people live in cities with more access to parks, public transport, shops, and services, they tend to walk more and receive direct health benefits. Finally, with decreased auto dependency, the detrimental effects of cars in cities become much more apparent. For example, a recent study conducted by the University of Connecticut found increased auto access and accommodation in cities leads to decreased residential density and vibrancy. Another reason, of course, why we're here today, pedestrian malls are being reconsidered due to scientists, government officials, and the public over climate change and the environmental pollution that cars contribute to CO2 and the other harmful pollutants that they create. So for all these reasons, there has been some recent significant movement to return to streets to pedestrians. One of the most famous ones is 5 blocks in the middle of downtown, otherwise known as Times Square, the most crowded streets in the United States. They converted that to temporary walking only in 2009 and have kept it that way. So if New York City and Times Square can do it, I think it's proven that everybody can do it. Another example that's much closer to home would be Boulder. Very similar sized community. Pearl Street in 1977 became a pedestrian mall, very similar to Railroad. It's become the center of culture, a place where people get together. And then on a large scale, the city of Bellingham went to Copenhagen last year to learn about how they do things. And many cities think of Copenhagen as this great model of mixing green initiatives with sound business practices. But what we don't know is in 1962, Copenhagen had traffic, it didn't have walking streets, and it was the exact opposite of what it is today. They were able to convert this over. So right now, our recommendation task force recommends that we begin a pilot program of closing Railroad Avenue down, and these are some of the slides that we have of this is Pearl Street, and that either on a temporary basis, whether it's the weekend or maybe for the summer, we try to make Railroad a walking-only street. We have our downtown sounds that's highly successful. Could you imagine if we can do that on a street all the time? So that's what it might look like. So that's our recommendation, would be to eventually close Railroad to cars and make it a walking street. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Good afternoon, Council. Lynn Murphy, representing Puget Sound Energy this afternoon, and presenting the Energy Supply Work Group presentation and recommendations to you all. I want to just take a quick minute and kind of highlight a few things about the partnership that PSC has had with the Bellingham City and the community over the last couple of years. So just some quick stats. There are currently over 1,200 solar installations between residents and businesses here in the city of Bellingham. That equates to about a little over 9 megawatts of power being produced here. We have well over 6,500 participants in our Green Power and Solar Choice programs, which is one of the highest in our service territory here in Bellingham. So congratulations on that. We've had many business efficiency programs where we've had well over 200 participants. That has created well over 1,500 megawatts of power saved. And those are energy efficiency grants that we go out to our businesses and we work with them on ways that they can make their business more efficient, whether it's reducing their lighting or their power usage. So just wanted to highlight some of the great partnerships that we've had with the community over the last couple of years. So let's talk a little bit about the energy supply recommendations that the task force looked at. So as you all are aware, we looked at the resolution that you all passed with 100% renewable energy ambitions in the electric supply sector for both city and community through a combination of partnerships with PSC, large-scale and centralized solar and wind generation, along with energy storage and some emerging technologies such as distributed energy and battery storage or energy storage. So what does this implementation look like, and what are some of the contexts and the questions that the Energy Supply Work Group had to look at? Just for your context, the Energy Supply Work Group consisted of all 9 of our Climate Action Task Force members, and we had several things that we had to look at and evaluate. So first and foremost, understanding that our state legislators passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which is the state's and all electric utilities' pathway to 100% clean electricity by 2045. So it was one factor we had to take into consideration. We also had to take into consideration what is the existing electricity demand for the city of Bellingham. We also had to look at the complex task of calculating and understanding electric increases and peak demands with the transition of electrification, like you've heard from the previous 3 work groups. We also had to look at existing renewable energy capacity, and also understanding that we had a very limited time to conduct detailed feasibility, costs, and impacts analysis with all impacted stakeholders. The Energy Supply Work Group started about midway through our 14 months together, and it just wasn't enough time to look at some of these complex issues. But we started on phase 1, if you will, and hope that the city can take it to phase 2. So let's talk about the renewable measures real quick. First and foremost, the city and PSC could look at a potential community-wide Green Direct program. This particular program, if you'll look at page 98 in your report, make sure I've got that correct, this recommendation could have the largest avoided emissions in the energy supply sector out of all the things that we recommend. And as you will see on that page 98, as I mentioned, community-wide Green Direct could operate similar to the current program that the city, Whatcom County, Western Washington University, and the Port of Bellingham currently subscribe to. This is a program where PSC and the city would work together to determine how to best procure green energy to meet the community's needs. As Mark mentioned earlier in the presentation and the introduction of our presentation today, it's going to take some additional evaluation between PSC and Bellingham and the city of Bellingham, a close partnership to evaluate how this will work from a legality standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. The next one there is City of Bellingham participates with PSC's Green Direct Phase 3, very identical to the city's current subscription to the Green Direct program. As city municipal buildings potentially shed their natural gas and thus electricity usage increases, Green Direct Phase 3 will allow the city to subscribe the increased electric usage into Green Direct Phase 3. Phase 3 of Green Direct has not been identified by PSC, but essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the potential shedding of the natural gas usage, which increases electric usage, and that increased electric usage currently is not in your Green Direct Phase 1 that you currently are subscribed to, so how can we make sure that we meet that gap? Then this third one there is to consider community solar in partnership with other organizations. Community solar, if you're not aware, it expands access to solar for people who face barriers to rooftop solar, such as upfront costs, home ownership, and solar readiness. These programs help facilitate community-located projects that customers share in costs and benefits of new local solar projects. PSC currently issued a request for information here about a month ago to a variety of agencies who might have interest in hosting some of these community solar programs and projects. The city, thankfully, submitted 3 projects or 3 potential sites. I don't know the locations, but I was excited to see that the city submitted potential sites, and so did the Port of Bellingham, and we believe that we're still going to be seeing more information coming in from other agencies across the city. We look forward to developing this particular program with the city. The last one here is evaluate geothermal potential. So recently, the Bureau of Land Management notified the U.S. Forest Service that interest had been expressed in exploring and potentially developing geothermal energy in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The USFS carried out consultation with the tribes, conducted public scoping, and initiated environmental assessment to analyze suitability of leasing. While recognized as a potential energy resource, local utilities have little experience with geothermal due to the initial costs and land management constraints. However, Snohomish County PUD may be a resource for this particular energy resource. It's not something that PSC has evaluated, but is always willing to have those conversations with the city. I'm now going to ask my fellow task force member, Christine Grant, to come up and provide the remainder of our energy supply recommendations.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the City Council for forming this task force and for your leadership on this critical issue. My name is Christine Grant. I have about a decade of experience working with electric utilities across the country on supply and demand side solutions to climate change. I've worked in red states and blue states with investor-owned utilities and member-owned rural electric cooperatives. I also teach energy policy up at Western. I want to start by thanking PSC for coming to the table on this effort. We are asking them to stretch. We are asking them to deeply consider the role they play in the communities they serve. And we are asking them to step away from natural gas generation and make clean electricity the heart of their 21st century business model. The resolution asked us to chart a path for getting to the moon, and it asked us to get to the moon fast. The moon is an analogy, of course, for a Bellingham that has dramatically reduced the carbon intensity of our energy supply. This means big changes not only in the way we generate electricity, but also changes in the way we consume energy. I have just a few key points from the energy supply chapter that I'd like to highlight for the council this afternoon. First of all, if you had to summarize Rick and Aaron's presentation in one word, what word would you pick? The word I would pick is electrification. Electrification of transportation and buildings is essential for meeting the 2035 ambitions, but we can't just electrify everything. We also need to clean up the fuel mix of our electricity generation. And currently, PSC's electricity is the dirtiest in the state. So this chapter really explores where we are going to get clean electricity so we can phase out fossil fuel-based electricity generation. Something I want to highlight that we can feel optimistic about is the fact that we are entering an era where clean electricity is cheap electricity. As you will see on the graph on page 75, large-scale renewables are now cost competitive or cheaper than the cost of gas generation. So I am optimistic about Measure 1 on page 77 that Lynn talked about related to developing community-wide Green Direct in partnership with PSE. And again, Lynn, I want to thank you and your team for bringing that option to the table. But I also want to draw attention to Measure 6 on page 80, which describes how the city could work with a renewable energy developer to bring city-owned rather than PSE-owned renewable energy resources to Bellingham for both municipal and community use. Whether we work with PSE or develop our own renewable energy resources, we need to clean up the fuel mix of our electricity generation as fast as possible. As Lynn mentioned, the Clean Energy Transformation Act commits Washington to an electricity supply free of greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. But that is 15 years late if we are trying to meet the goals of this resolution. And based on renewable energy development costs that we are seeing today, there's no reason to wait. I'm going to touch on 3 more things with my remaining time: demand-side resources, financing, and the concept of local control. So this chapter was called Energy Supply, but we can't underestimate the value of demand-side resources. So demand-side resources are basically how we save energy and also how we shift when we use energy. So at 6 p.m. on a cold, dark December night, many of us are going to want the lights on, a warm house, a bath for the kids, maybe even getting the dishwasher going. That's a lot of energy use all at the same time in houses all across Bellingham. Demand response resources voluntarily shift those energy usages during periods of high demand and limited resource availability. This can be very subtle and almost invisible to customers. Utilities all across the country for many years have been doing this by remotely controlling things like clothes dryers. Usually it is just for a minute. The dryers keep spinning, only the heat is cycled on or off, allowing utilities to make balancing adjustments. At scale and in combination with energy efficiency and energy storage, this allows utilities to reduce their reliance on peaker plants, power plants that are used exclusively during those periods of peak demand and that are primarily fueled with fracked gas. Super well-insulated water heaters are also an amazing demand response resource. I've worked with dozens of electric cooperatives all across the country that are doing these programs. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council recently assessed demand response resources and identified close to 4,500 megawatts of regional demand response potential. The assessment found that demand response is the least expensive means to manage peak. Right now, PSC offers no demand response programs in Bellingham. As we discuss in Measure 7, we'd like to make sure we're piloting demand response programs in Bellingham. Point number two I want to highlight is the critical role of financing. Aaron already touched on this, but it's worth mentioning again. Even when they offer an attractive return on investment, upfront costs are the main barrier to action when it comes to customers making energy-related improvements to their homes and businesses. So I want to draw your attention to the property assessed clean energy financing model that we discuss on page 87. That idea of PACE financing is allowed in 33 states, but not in Washington. PACE is likely to be considered in the 2020 legislative session, and there's an opportunity for the council to help communicate with lawmakers in Olympia about the importance of that. Closer to home, just to give you another idea of what's going on with financing, literally just a few miles across the water, the member-owned electric cooperative that provides most of the electricity for the San Juan Islands, Orcas Power and Light, offers an on-bill financing program for their customers to fund ductless heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and EV chargers. The interest rate they offer to their customers is just 2%. Eligibility is not based on credit score, just bill payment history. The repayment charge shows up as a line item on the monthly electricity bill, so there is no new bill you are paying each month. And the program is available to renters as long as the property owner agrees and signs a form. I think that story about the simplicity of Orcas Power and Light's on-bill financing program is a good transition to my last point. My last point relates to local control of not only our energy supply, but also our local control of the electric utility serving our community. Right now, we have very little control. Measure 15 suggests that the City of Bellingham conduct a feasibility study to explore creating a city municipal utility district, also known as municipalization. There are 4 different ownership and governance structures for electric utilities in Washington state. It is possible to move from one ownership and governance structure to another. Communities served by investor-owned utilities have the least amount of local control compared to other governance structures. Some of this honestly has to do with geography. PSC is based in Bellevue, owned by investors in Canada and Holland, and regulated by an agency in Olympia. Convening all these stakeholders, or just trying to meet with a few of them for a cup of coffee, can be really challenging. Digging into the feasibility of municipalization here in Bellingham is something that all of the task force members voted for, with the exception of PSE. This issue of local control is something many communities are grappling with right now as they consider their energy futures. There are no easy answers and many, many layers to this conversation. I think what we can all agree on is that if we want to succeed at meeting the goals of this resolution, we need the best possible team working on this. A team that is committed to this community, a team that loves the problem, a team that will move with urgency, acknowledging that this is a crisis. It has been a privilege to serve my community as a member of this task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine and Lynn. So normally I would lead things up by saying that there's no clapping or booing or haranguing of speakers. We want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and safe. Just if we can stick to that rule, I'd appreciate it. Councilmember Vargas.
Mark, I'm going to ask for some clarification. The task members have been referring to page numbers that do not correlate to our package. Can you tell us what document? I looked in the climate action plan. It's not correlating to that.
It's the task force report, but it's the original pagination of that. It's not the packet.
It's not the
pagination.
packet.
So
Okay.
if you look, they should be both there. It's just a matter of you've got to look at the ones on this the left bottom. Sorry about that. Yep.
Take a little break.
We seem to be losing members here.
Scared us off already. It's too complicated.
take over the power, take a little break. That's a good idea.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and continue.
All right. So this will be the most math-intensive presentation. That's why we saved it to the very end when you're all really awake and ready to go. So I'm Charles Barnhart. I'm a professor at Western Washington University. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, not to be like braggy or anything, but to instill some confidence in the analysis that myself and my graduate student, Patrick Shive, have done. I have a PhD from UC Santa Cruz in planetary physics. I learned about the energy climate crisis and switched into net energy analysis. As much as I love Mars and Venus, I love Earth more, and I saw a problem facing it, so I wanted to use my skills for that. And so I got a postdoc at NASA studying climate on Mars and Earth, and then wanted to do more, so I got another fellowship at Stanford University in their Global Climate and Energy project, in which I did a lot of marginal abatement cost analysis for carbon, a lot of net energy analysis, tracing energy through systems, and I've written several papers about these topics. All right. So what I wanted to figure out is, where can we get the biggest bang for our buck? How do we reduce the most amount of emissions or avoid the most amount of emissions? And how do we do it as inexpensively as possible? And so it comes down to this same three-legged stool that Aaron introduced. We can avoid emissions with energy efficiency. That way we don't have to burn as much carbon. It's all about combustion, right? You're burning carbon to make energy. Electrification allows us to no longer burn carbon in our cars and directly in our home via natural gas. And then renewable energy allows us to no longer burn carbon in our power plants to supply that electricity for our electric cars and electric homes. So quantifying all this sort of stuff, let's look at the marginal abatement cost. So this is the industry standard. It's used in international consultant firms like McKinsey. It's used in all sorts of academic papers. And basically, it's just trying to quantify how much money does it cost to avoid a metric ton of carbon. Dollar per metric ton. Pretty easy stuff. To look at a particular cost analysis, we have an idea, we have a project. Let's replace a light bulb, let's replace a water heater, let's buy an electric car instead of an internal combustion car. Well, that's gonna cost money. But you don't have to buy the entire car. What we're concerned with is the difference, right? My car breaks, I have to buy a new car. I could buy an electric car or a internal combustion car. If I wanna pay a premium from that electric car, because I want to reduce my own carbon footprint, then I'll look at that marginal, the difference in cost, not the absolute cost. So that's the numerator there, the top line there. So you take the project or the idea to reduce carbon, its cost, and subtract it from the business as usual cost. On the denominator, we're looking at how many metric tons of CO2 is emitted by the business as usual, or the baseline, and subtracting the project. The idea here is that we're trying to avoid CO2, so you wouldn't mix those terms, otherwise that'd be a strange sort of project to do. So it's project minus baseline for costs and baseline minus project for emissions. It gets a lot more complicated than this pretty rapidly, because each of these terms are functions, right? They have nested variables that have nested variables, etc. Okay, so let's start with something simple. We have an old-fashioned incandescent light bulb. You're sitting on your couch reading a book, and it burns out. So you have to go to the store to buy a new light bulb. You can buy another incandescent light bulb, or you can buy an LED light bulb. The old one costs $1, lasts a year, and it burns 60 watts to light up your room. The LED light bulb costs $2, but it lasts 5 years. So if you look at the annualized cost, how much do you pay per year? It's 40 cents per year. Yeah, you can apply discount rates and all sorts of things like that if you want to get nerdy, but the basic annualized cost is 40 cents per year. You guys familiar with Terry Pratchett, the sci-fi fantasy author? He has this, this boot theory of socioeconomic injustice. Are you familiar with that? So a poor man buys a boot for a pair of boots for $100, lasts him a year. A rich man can buy a $300 or $200 pair of boots, and it lasts them 3 years. So you can see where I'm getting with this. On a per annual basis, the rich man gets richer because he has to spend less per year on boots. This is why these sort of, incentives and help, the three-legged stool plus is so important, so that we can allow that lift for the poor man to buy the fancier boots that last longer. The LED is the fancier pair of boots. It lasts longer and ends up being cheaper over time. All right, we need a few more assumptions before we do this marginal abatement cost curve analysis. Currently, PSC power rates are about 9 cents per kilowatt to 10 cents per kilowatt hour if you want to pay for green power. Their emissions are 5 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And let's assume that we have this light on for about 1,000 hours per year. So project minus baseline over project. Blah. So we took the annualized capital cost, that's the 0.4 minus $1, plus the operational cost. So as soon as you pay for the light bulb, it doesn't just run itself, you have to put energy through it, and that energy costs you money. So that money is 10 cents per kilowatt hour, multiplied by the 1,000 hours per year you use it, multiplied by the project minus baseline in power consumption. So the power consumption of the LED is only 10 watts. The power consumption of the incandescent is 60 watts. Looking at the denominator, the carbon emissions, well, now we have to concern ourselves with the carbon intensity of the grid. So each time the grid gives you a kilowatt hour, 0.5 kilograms of CO2 went up into the sky, mainly Montana's sky. And then we have to convert that to metric tons to use the dimensional parlance of the marginal abatement cost. It's dollars per metric ton, so that's what that 1,000 is for. Multiplied by how many hours a year you're using it, because every hour you're using it, you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere. Multiplied by the power difference, baseline minus project. And this equates to a marginal abatement cost of negative $221 per metric ton. What does that mean? It means to the community of Bellingham, every metric ton we avoid by switching out our light bulbs, the community has now saved $221. This makes money. And this is why we need to focus more than just capital costs. We have to look at operational costs, and we have to look at potential incentives and rebates, not just the simple capital costs. If we look at that, it's a red herring, and yeah. I mean, the whole red herring thing is it's supposed to smell fishy and distract the wolves along the trail. This red herring might smell like a sulfur odorant. Okay, residential water heaters. Now we're going to get a little more complicated. Okay, so we have to look at the difference in upfront costs for purchasing the appliance. I walked around Home Depot a couple weeks ago, and the best electric heat pump water heater costs $1,300, but PSE is currently offering a $500 rebate. It was warranted for 10 years. The most efficient natural gas water heater costs $1,059. This is to get 95% efficient. You can get cheaper gas water heaters with far less efficiency, but then you have to pay more money for your operational costs. So just looking at the annualized capital costs, you're already saving money by buying this electric heat pump water heater. Now let's look at some operational costs. This gets confusing because one you power with electricity, the other you power with gas. So the operating cost for electricity is the energy used for electricity plus the unit price of electricity. It even gets more confusing because they have different efficiencies, right? The heat pump is about 300 to 400% efficient because it doesn't have to generate heat, it can move heat from one location to another, whereas the gas one has to purely generate heat. And so it has to use more energy to generate those BTUs. So on a per annual energy use equivalence basis, taking into account that efficiency difference, the electric water heater takes 900 kilowatt hours of electricity at 9 cents per kilowatt hour, and the natural gas water heater only takes 160 therms. There's more energy in a therm compared to a kilowatt hour, 29.3x. But the therm is a little bit more expensive, but it's cheaper on a per energy use basis, but you need more energy because that water heater is not as efficient. So even taking into account the price premium for energy on electricity compared to gas, the electric water heater still saves you money on operational expenses because it's so much more efficient. Put more simply, electricity is 3 times more expensive, but that water heater is 3 to 4x more efficient. So you don't need as much energy. Okay, so the annualized marginal cost, capital cost plus operating cost is about negative $200 per year. The carbon analysis, we have to consider the annual emissions. And so this depends on the amount of gas you use multiplied by the emission intensity of gas. That's the 160 therms multiplied by 5.3 kilograms CO2 per therm. This is baseline minus project, which is the new idea, the electric water heater, the heat pump water heater. So that's 900 kilowatt hours of energy multiplied by the grid intensity of PSC, which is around 5 kilograms CO2 per kilowatt hour. And so this avoids about half a metric ton per water heater in Bellingham. You can see how this quickly scales up because there's 19,000 some odd houses in Bellingham. So you can start avoiding a very significant amount of CO2 by electrifying water heating. And this only gets better, right? This is just one leg of the stool we're talking about. This is efficiency. We're switching to something more efficient. And I guess it's the other one, it's electrification. But if we want to get really deep, just like the electric vehicles, then we can change the carbon intensity of that electricity supply by switching to renewables. And then this just gets better and better and better. And so the electricity supply, as it gets greener, any electric appliance gets greener, any electric car gets greener. Whereas the gas, this is as good as it gets. And the more we look at it, the worse it gets because of methane leakage rates. So if there's a methane leakage rate at just about 2.8%, which is the academic assumed standard for all of the United States, then that emission intensity nearly doubles. And so gas is only going to look worse, electricity is only going to look better going forward. All right, so putting it all together, by switching out water heaters, we get a marginal abatement cost of about $413 per metric ton. Again, this is something that will not only use less energy, emit less carbon, it will save the community of Bellingham significant amounts of money. All right. So I'm not going to go through every single measure with this detailed analysis. Here are the heavy hitters, right? These are the measures that avoid the most amount of CO2. I've ranked them on this bar plot. We've done significant analysis. I'm happy to share all the spreadsheets that Patrick and I have worked on with you all to see where the numbers come from. So greening our electricity with a Green Direct example. This particular analysis was run via ClearPath, a standardized model used all over the world. Shows that we can avoid nearly 200 to 250,000 metric tons of CO2 per year. Now, for reference, Bellingham emits about 800 to 900,000 metric tons. So we're already getting, a quarter of the way there just with that, with switching to renewable electricity. If we switch to EVs, we get another quarter. There's two lines there. One is, so this is with PSE's current grid. Just electrifying vehicles, we avoid 100,000 metric tons of CO2 because electric cars are so much more efficient than internal combustion engines. But then if we go all the way with powering those electric vehicles with green energy, then we get another significant chunk, all the way up to about 250,000 metric tons. The next big things to do are electrify our buildings. So electrifying space heating here at 150,000, electrifying water heating here at nearly 50 to 100,000. Again, depending on the carbon intensity of the electricity. You can see why this three-legged stool is so important. And then energy efficiency, this is just, let's stop throwing heat into outer space and keep it in our homes and buildings. By sealing and insulating our buildings, then we can avoid 75,000 metric tons of CO2. And then there's some mode shifting and densification ideas over here. They're all important as well. They made the cut. When looking at their costs, how much money does it cost to avoid a metric ton of CO2? Green Direct, if we can get commercial rates, will actually save money compared to today's rates. And that bears out with the levelized cost of electricity estimates coming from the national labs and Electric Power Reliability Institute and other consultants that show that green electricity continues to get cheaper and cheaper. So that has a slightly negative, but I mean, anything that's negative should be obvious, right? That will save us money. EVs are actually cheaper to, over time, over the life of a vehicle, over 10 years, a EV will save you money. It's cheaper to own an EV than an internal combustion vehicle. And all of those numbers for Vehicle cost, vehicle efficiency, and fuel costs, I pulled directly from PSC's website, so I'm not trying to cheat on that at all. Electric space heat comes about even. The electric heat pumps are more expensive than a furnace, but they cost less to use. Efficiency is a no-brainer. That's the light bulb, right? It costs far less money to buy on an annualized basis, and it costs less money to use. We have water heaters and a few other things. Some of these things, like parking measures, is difficult to quantify both the carbon and the cost. I put that at 0, just assuming that the parking could go revenue neutral. I imagine that it would avoid carbon because people wouldn't drive as much to parking spaces, et cetera. I think I've spent enough time. Hopefully that's instilled some confidence in this sort of analysis. And I want you to know that that's not all. There's plenty more that we can do going forward to further look into all these measures and approach that triple bottom line analysis. And along those lines, I wanted to conclude with my recommendations and then an offer of help. So with energy efficiency, we should switch to EVs, we should switch to heat pumps, and we should insulate our buildings. With electrification, just electrifying buildings, we get 100,000, we get that 250,000 if we switch to renewables. 60,000 alone just switching to heat pumps within our buildings. And then renewables is how we get really, really deep decarbonization here in Bellingham. Switching off the dirty PSE 0.5 kilograms per kilowatt hour to something down to about 30 grams per kilowatt hour, which we get from renewables. And that's on a life cycle basis. That's the emissions associated with building the things. Obviously, they emit nothing when we turn them on. All right. So with all this new demand, we switch everything to electric vehicles. If we switch all of our houses to electricity, there's going to be a lot more electricity demand by 2035. I've done a very liberal analysis, and that's not politically liberal, that's liberal in terms of mathematics. I tried to give a worst case scenario for electricity demand, assuming the highest population growth rates that were reasonable, the highest urban sprawl rates that were reasonable, and ubiquitous electrification of all vehicles and buildings, and we double electricity demand by 2035. That's 15 years, 72 divided by 15, that's about a 5% growth rate. It's not untenable. We can do this sort of thing, and again, that's worst case scenario. And Western Washington University is here to help, right? At Stanford, I've gotten incredible offers from oil companies. I'm doing this for love of the game, love of the planet, and love of my children. I want to continue working on these sort of things. Myself, Professors Imran Sheikh and Froy Cifuentes do the same sort of geeky analysis that I do. If you want more policy analysis, talk to Sharon Schumach or read Dorsey Parmentier. So there's plenty of assets available at Western. We're designing courses on these sorts of things so that we have an informed community. And we're here to help to bolster the community's confidence in these measures that we've been working on the last 18 months. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Charles. I guess that didn't work. All right. Does this conclude the presentation?
It does. I think you can tell by the length and the depth of the presentation by the task force members how much work they've put into this. And certainly that we want to acknowledge that and recognize that that was a significant amount of body of work that these folks have put into. Just to maybe kind of recap, there was more work to do. As Mark pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, there's more technical analysis that needs to be done to help address or start to address the questions of affordability and social equity. Those are two key points to that. And equally important, if not more so, is there needs to be more public process into this discussion for policy for the City Council. Up to this point, the task force meetings have all been open to the public, but there has not been the formal public dialogue that needs to occur with policy decisions. And so to that point, staff's recommendation, I will reiterate that, is to come back to the council in early January and to potentially form a standing committee to address each of these topics alone. That will give us the time of 2020 to address the technical nature for the social and affordability aspects and to formalize the public process. One of the comments that was expressed to us, the staff, by the was that without that formal definition of public process, the members of the community have been left at, what are we doing? And that has led to a significant amount of rhetoric, some factual, some not, on all sides of the question is what the city is doing. And so we would recommend that you formalize that public formal process before a policy decision is made to ensure that all aspects have been looked at and considered in due process. And so with that, I think we're done with our presentation. Task force members are available for questions. Staff are available for questions as you might want to engage. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Committee, Councilmember Knudsen.
I just want to start out by saying thanks to the task force. 16 months of long, hard work. And I know you get a lot of grief already when it's just being presented to us. But I believe we have a lot of work to do, and I want to move that we direct staff to provide a comparison between the Climate Action Task Force recommendations and the adopted Climate Action Plan on January 13th of 2020. And I also want to move this with this motion that the council does create a Climate Action Committee with our standing committees that we already have.
Second.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Knudsen and second by Councilmember Lillquist. Councilmember Barker.
Well, I mean, I appreciate coming back with what we currently are doing and what they've suggested, but it's really clear inside of the report. I mean, if that's just for the community, we could do a community outreach, but for the actual council, we weren't anywhere near the ambitions. That's why we did this process. So I think that I'd like to understand, you said there's a tremendous amount of work with technical analysis as well as community outreach, and your current plan only includes the old climate action plan. So it seems to me like you're going to need a lot more resources as well as different consultants to come on board that can do some of that outreach as well as technical assistance. So I think there's room for conversation in what does that look like, and are those things that you can get started on now to bring back to the next council in 2020, some budget requests and RFPs.
Agreed. There's a lot of work to do. And I think the first step of that is to say, where are we at and what would this take to get to this next level? And we start that on the 13th. One potential avenue that the council consider is if with that standing committee, we will develop a work plan to say, what are we going to do? What resources do we need to address those technical questions? Do we need to engage citizens into assessing those? Do we need to hire the resources to get a more professional approach to that? What do we need to do to tackle that? And I don't think we've had the time to address that. This is the first time the public really has seen this report. This is the first time the council has seen the entirety of the report. It's going to take a significant amount of work to assess what that work plan is going to need to be and what resources are needed to inform the council and the committee as to what decisions you might want to make.
Councilmember Vargas, then Borneman, then Lillquist.
If the motion is approved, I would like to be considered to be on that working committee. I have 12 years of experience in energy efficiency, and I would like to participate on that committee.
Noted. Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, I think Gene's motion is a good idea, but I also think we need to assure the community that we are going to have public meetings, and I think I'm not going to be here for it, so I can be out in the audience, which will be great. And you're going to have to do the hard work, but that we will have a separate meeting from a council meeting so that the community, we can see the interest here, and there's much more than this, you know, so there'll be separate meetings for people to come and comment on what's coming out of this. So every public comment period from here on out doesn't become a de facto public hearing on this issue. So I think as part of the motion, there should be something probably mentioned that there will be separate meetings with the council.
Councilmember
Yes, that's fine. We can add that to it.
Okay. Councilmember Lillquist.
So I'm supporting this motion, but I want more than that. So this is a motion to establish a standing committee. This is a motion to also ask staff to do some looking at the current action plan and the new recommendations. Both those are necessary steps, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Part of it Terry just referred to. I think we need a different and or a more than usual kind of public process. I think we need something more like listening tours as well as the in-committee work. I think we need a lot of public discussion. I think there's some work the City Council can do, not waiting till January, but at this meeting and maybe at the next meeting, to begin to discuss amongst ourselves the kind of what I would call a sorting procedure. I think actually Charles' work already gave us the roadmap to that sorting procedure. It's already helped to focus our attention. From this review, I can already see that some of these things are going to be downhill runs, economically, technically, and they need to be advanced and fast-tracked. The Green Direct is the biggest game changer. It also has the most work to be done. So I would like discussion and direction, not wait until January, for us to start amongst ourselves deciding how we're going to sort and how we're going to move these forwards, which ones we want to deal with in one way, technically, which ones we want to work in another way, say legally and in terms of policy changes. I think that each of these measures, the measures are different, and they're going to need to be sorted and I wouldn't say ranked, but sorted into groups for what those next steps are. And I don't think we should wait till January to start discussing the next steps. We're not going to decide on next steps now, but I don't want to wait till January to start discussing next steps.
Got Mayor Kelly, and then Councilmember Borneman, then Vargas, then Knudsen.
I could wait till the end if you want me to.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's pretty exciting. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I agree with what Michael's saying and what Jean proposed, because I do think you look at the complications, the complexity of the information that got presented to us today, and I really truly believe that a standing committee that can actually get into the details, like similar to what we did on the waterfront, but obviously a lot more technical, is a great way for both the public to be informed about the details and also the council to gain more information. So I think that's a great idea. When we did the community solution work groups, we didn't wait for a year to come up with things we wanted to implement. We looked at that sorting that Michael's talking about, and there has been some preliminary work on that sorting already. So that would have been one thing that would come to you in January. But to look at the sorting and see, based on both what you're going to get and how easily you can implement it, what we do on an ongoing basis. So you're not going to wait a year or 2 years to do anything. You get to do it as you're moving along. And I think that it's worth having that discussion in January to make sure that you've got a plan in place that you agree with, and that's going to be fulfilling the promise to the public that we are actually moving forward on improving what we've already been doing on climate change. So I don't know, Michael, what you were thinking about what you were going to be adopting. Maybe you could clarify that for me.
Maybe we should dispose of the motion then and keep talking.
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think before we start the sorting process and other things, we should hear staff's report. And since that was already kind of set up on a two-part system, I think we should hear that part when they bring that back, and then council. I agree with Michael, things should get moving as quickly as possible on looking at those issues, but I do think this was a two-part presentation. This and then the staff's presentation, and I think you need both of them before those decisions can start being made.
Okay. Councilmember Vargas.
Firstly, I want to back up just a second and say how grateful and thankful I am to the task force, because this was very ambitious. This was a huge lift, and the city alone could not have started this process. So thank you so much for all the information that you provided us, and it's a great guide for us to be able to make decisions from. So I just wanted to say thank you. Secondly is because of the holiday, that means that tomorrow we start working on our council packet for next week. That means we have a 24-hour turnover. And it doesn't seem like we're being very prudent about thinking about being thoughtful of this process. And I don't want to slow it down, but I think turning around in a week and asking the staff to deliver that information so that we can deliberate, it doesn't seem right. And also, we have 2 council members that are leaving. We're going to have a brand new mayor, and I think that our new council members and our new mayor should be part of this conversation. So my personal recommendation is that we give the staff the 3 weeks that they need to review the information discussion and come back with our new administration and our new council members, and in the new year, go at this strong and hard, but to give everybody an opportunity to make that decision and have our new our new council members and our new mayor be part of that discussion. So I would prefer that we wait till January.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. You know, they spent 16 months on this. And I've been waiting for this day, and I learned some new things today. And there's a lot of stuff out there that is not in this report. So we owe it. And our task now is to sell this to the citizens of Bellingham. To the citizens of Bellingham. That is our task. It's not going to happen overnight. We can't do it next week. We can't do it the following week. This is going to be probably, in all my years here, one of the longest things we have ever tried to undertake. A worldwide climate problem, and what are we going to do here in Bellingham on our part? We can't solve everybody else's problem. The biggest reason I was concerned about the timeline is we have Ferndale, we have Linden, we have Sumas, we have Everson, we have Nooksack. Are they going to do the same things we're going to do? If we rush through this and get to 2035 and we're completely electrified, are they? The dirty air will come this way, whatever way the wind blows. So I am not a climate denier. I've lived climate change in this city my whole life. When I grew up, we used to have snow every Christmas. We used to have hot summers, really hot summers. So I believe in climate change. I believe in this committee. I believe in a lot of things that are in here. But now we're getting towards the end of the year. We can't do this in one meeting. We can't do it in another meeting. I want to hear staff come back on the 13th, and then we go from there. And having a new committee with the new committee members on there, or see with some of us old barnacles on there, that's fine. But I think, you know, this is a real heavy lift, and it's going to be hard on all of us. And quit smiling, Borneman. That's enough of that. So anyway, I think, again, I can't say enough about the task force working 16 months. That's a long commitment, so thank you very much.
Councilmember Barker.
Can we get through this motion, and then we can have further conversation around Michael's and other motions we might have?
Sure. So a motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Councilmember Barker.
So I think that there is a real opportunity for this council, the council that made this resolution, that tasks these wonderful people with all of this work, is to give clear direction to the next council. And we already know, I mean, we have our mayor-elect here who's welcome to come and speak to the council on his ideas of what's moving forward. But we have Holly, we have Hannah, and we're going to have Lisa. So it's a pretty similar council. And I do think it's irresponsible of this council to not give some pretty clear direction on what our intent is and where we're trying to go. I understand that we have a lot more conversations to do, and we're going to have to figure out all kinds of different budget amendments to figure out how to get those resources on board. But it is important to start signaling very clearly that for me, and I think for the majority of this council, and what we've been shown here today, is that the key is this community committing to switching to electricity and committing to get 100% of that fuel source renewable. So with that, I have a motion that we can start getting our comprehensive plan aligned with this. And that would be adding a goal, and whether you want that in the community design or what other chapter staff decides, but the motion is to add a goal into the comprehensive plan that says, safeguard the future health and public safety of our community by converting our fuel sources to electricity and ensuring those sources are 100% renewable. And so Monet has that. She can repeat it. But the point of this is we have all kinds of policies inside your comprehensive plan, and it's what really gives us the energy and the notion to pull back and to decide what we want to do. And if we don't have commitments like this inside of the comprehensive plan and we start moving forward, we're not moving in unison. So what happens is we decide to add a goal into the comprehensive plan. It goes through a huge public process with staff to develop all kinds of policies that support that goal. It gets docketed. We have a public hearing on it. But it is another stage in this that I think this council could clearly signal that we're on board. We just have to figure out how we're going to get there. So again, the motion is add a comprehensive plan goal that says safeguard the future health and public safety of our community by converting our fuel sources to electricity and ensuring those sources are 100% renewable.
City Attorney.
Point of order, don't we have a motion on the?
No, we just took care of that one.
Okay, okay.
That's been disposed. City Attorney Rufato, please.
Yeah, Peter Rufato, City Attorney's Office. Just to clarify, when we do have a comprehensive plan amendment, there's a process, as you pointed out, council member, for docketing that. There's a motion for docketing that, and there's a process for that motion, and then there's a process leading up to whatever change. So we just want to make sure you're clear that in a motion to add almost suggests that you're going right to the end, but I know that's not what you're suggesting, but as long as it's clear what you're really doing in terms of the comprehensive plan. It sounds like maybe you're recommending that that be explored as a potential addition to the docket or something of that nature, but I just don't want to sort of end up at the end when really you're looking at something at the beginning or pre-beginning.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought I explained that whole process, but yes.
Okay, Councilmember Lillquist.
Yeah, with Peter's clarification, I'm in support of this, and I would actually broaden it a little bit. I think that staff should take your suggested policy language, but I think it might be good to look at our environment chapter, other parts of the comprehensive plan, and see if staff can identify places where we have gaps in our policy language. So if that is the understanding of the motion, it's not exclusive to your language, but it really is a look at our comprehensive plan to make sure that there's alignment in that comp plan. And the reason we need to revise the comp plan is it's a legally controlling document, and many of the things we do, especially in land use, they have to have a basis in that comp plan. So comp plan comes first, implementation comes second, and so I think it's really prudent that we ask staff, and you just, basically right now signal to them we're going to need to revise the comp plan with regard to align these. We already have one suggested new policy. There may be others. So if that's the understanding of the motion, then I'm entirely supporting. I would second it.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Councilmember Warnham.
Yeah, rather than support this motion right now, I would prefer that you write it up so that we can actually see what's in front of us, take a look at it, bring it to the next meeting at least, so that it's out there, and we, instead of just throwing it out here where we don't have that to look at.
Okay, I can put it on the overhead, or I can bring it back to 2016.
I asked you this is what I would prefer.
Or to the 16th, yeah.
So I'm not going to support it at this time, but I would if you do it because usually when we do these kinds of things, it's presented, you're going to do it for the next meeting.
Councilmember Vargas, then
totally
Knudsen.
Different.
April, I'm hesitant on this. First of all, I'm completely committed on Bellingham being a leader in transitioning away from our fossil fuel dependency. Absolutely, and I want to go down this path. However, to make policy when I don't have detailed feasibility, costs, and impact analysis to something as huge as our comprehensive plan, and just on a whim and put it out there without any of us having had a chance to look at it, that doesn't seem, that feels scary to me. I need an opportunity to know some of these answers before I commit to something, to know that I can actually achieve it. And whether it comes from the Planning Commission or whatever organization or the task force, we need to know those answers before we make policy. Because I'm not going to stand behind something that I cannot guarantee. And until that time and I know those answers, I won't be committing to something like that.
Councilmember Knudsen.
I won't support it either. And the motion that I made and the motion that was passed is the motion I came here today to vote on. I read the packet this weekend, and the staff motion is what I agreed with, and that's what I'm going to stick with. But to go out now and make motions saying this is what we're going to do, we're going to electrify, we're going to put in the comprehensive plan, then our listening tour, Michael, is over. The listening tour is over, and we're now into implementation. I don't think that's how we should do our job up here. This, like I said, this is the biggest issue that's ever come across our desk, and we can't rush through it like that. I know we have a full crowd, everybody wants to go home happy. Well, not everybody's going to go home happy. They never go home happy. I know how it works up here. I don't even go home happy. My wife isn't happy. So, seriously, let's just, January 13th is not that long away. at all. So I think we just need to stick with what we did, and come January 13th, let's get to work.
Councilmember Barker, then Lillquist.
So just to be clear, in our comprehensive plan, we have all kinds of goals that we have not met yet. These are telling us in our community where we're trying to strive to and get to, and we actually have all kinds of goals that contradict each other. And so it just gives a framework, and the process that I put forward is simply to say, we're going to start this docketing process, which means staff has to come back with all kinds of language, all kinds of opportunities. They have to build even policies to support under that. And in that process, this council, the next council, could decide, yeah, it's not looking great. This is simply making the signal and saying we're moving forward with setting a goal for the docket and the process, and for staff to come back and start building what all of us have said we're moving toward, but building that into the comprehensive plan in parallel of all the work that you're going to be doing. You're going to end up having to do this anyway. It's just simply telling the community that we appreciate all of this work, we are on board, we want to move in this direction, and therefore we want our comprehensive plan to say that too. It is in no way a promise of anything. It has no dates, and if you look through all of your goals inside the comprehensive plan, we have not met many of them.
Acting Director, Public Works Director Eric Johnson.
One thing that I might add to our intent to coming back on the 13th is to also help start develop the work plan for 2020, which in my opinion would address the questions about how do we do those things. If we're to put something in the comprehensive plan, which would be very appropriate, what's the process to go through to do that? So as we're talking about this conversation about how are we going to demonstrate to the public that we are doing what the council has directed us to do, which is to do more. We have the plan, we have that today. We need some time to come back and say, well, how are we going to do this? And I would not disagree with the need to add it to the comprehensive plan, but we need time to develop the technical work plan to say how would we do that? What's the process to get to that point? How do we engage that over the next year? And so that idea coming back on the 20th, on the January 13th, is to compare the two plans. How would we do it? What are the measures to do implementation, and develop that work plan for staff to do that in 2020?
Councilmember Lillquist.
I think maybe I'm sorry to say this, April, I think kind of the mistake is that you suggested specific language. I think what you're doing is you're throwing out a draft language, and people are taking as if that's what we're going to approve. I think, as Mr. Johnson indicated, we will probably have a comp plan component, some language, policy language that needs to be created to align all of this. And what that language is, we won't have that for 6 months or more. So I think what Councilman Barker is doing is saying to the public and to the staff, that's one more piece of what's going to have to roll out next year. And so, while I think I think by being specific, people read it as that's what we're going to do. I think you understand that this is a draft that's thrown out, and the real issue is we need full alignment, and that is going to, as Mr. Rufato indicated, follow an annual calendar, follow procedure, follow notification, follow necessary public hearings and publication. So if the motion is to begin that lengthy process is in parallel to this. So this is a heavy lift, and I think we should start limbering up now. But we're not going to be lifting it in January or maybe even February, depending on which one. And the comp plan language, that won't come back until even later, as I understand the motion.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Barker and seconded by Councilmember Lillquist. Further discussion.
I can finish. So the council understands this process, and so I understand that, but I have to give some kind of language to help people understand where we're going. We often bring things forward, Terry, without them being inside of a measure or written up. It's happened. You've done it. You did it in the budget in the 11th hour, the last biennium. So this happens. We didn't have the information until Thursday, so no, I didn't have the chance to put an item into the comprehensive, or into our agenda. So again, this is signaling work to move forward, to have staff. It's far more than 3 weeks. I mean, you have until, I think it's near the end of January, your next meeting, or mid-January. So it gives staff an opportunity to really understand. And what I think it does for the next council is it just lets them know that this work didn't go undone, that it would be irresponsible for us not to give some kind of direction other than go and tell us what's different from this plan than what we were just presented. I mean, that's pretty clear. It's a pretty easy lift for staff, but it gives something to bring back to you all so that you're working these two plans in parallel. But with that, we can just have the vote.
Councilmember Borneman.
Yeah, just a quick clarification since I was called out. I didn't just bring it up at that meeting. I sent it out to everyone before the meeting so you knew exactly what we would be voting on. So just the clarification of your statement, but I'm still not going to support it right now.
Councilmember Vargas.
I just want to say, April, I totally appreciate what you're trying to do. I just feel like it's a little bit premature, and therefore I won't be supporting it. I support the idea behind it. I just want to do the right thing, and this seems a little rushed to me.
Further discussion? Okay, I'm going to chime in here. The chair serves the council, so I go last. So I support the original motion that was presented to us by the staff. I'm absolutely in support of renewable energy, 100%. In support of electrifying our city, 100%. I don't think it's a good idea for this council to be prescriptive to the next council or to the next mayor. I know where I stand, and I'm pretty sure I know where everyone else stands on this. I support the formation of a new committee that's specifically for climate action. I think forming that committee is a statement that this council will make that says that we take this work very seriously, that we support the work that's been done by the Climate Action Task Force, and that that committee will then further that work going on into the future. And it's been brought up here on the dais that this work will continue for some time. This is not going to happen overnight. This is not a rush to an action. This is going to be a long series of conversations, and it's going to take a while. It's very technical work as well. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Motion fails 4-3. Further motions or action? Okay. Seeing none. Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to our next item. I think we'll just take a. We're going to take a break, but before we do that, we have some things that we wanted to give to the Climate Action Task Force, just to say thank you for the work that you've done. We've got some gift bags for you here. Now we can clap.
You got somebody taking a picture of this? You got somebody taking a picture of this?
Yeah.
A lot of work.
Brent, have everybody stand there.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I think we're going to get a group photo here. Yeah, thanks, Don. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it, Christine. Thanks for your work. Thank you for your work.
Oh, yeah. We got to get
your bag. One of your bags here.
Charlie, come on. We got to get everybody a picture.
Hey, guys, we're going to do a group photo.
Lynn.
Who? Yeah.
I take the most worst picture of the planet, so.
Yeah.
Is Seth in here too?
Seth.
Yeah, Seth.
Seth Fleetwood to the dais, please.
You need the way you are.
Run with. They look wonderful.
Great, just the way you are. One.
Wait. We got Hannah up there.
Okay.
David, come on. Wait.
Mark,
Go
you have to
one
go
more.
up there. You have to go.
Mark, Andrew, what are you doing down here? Yeah, what are you doing down here?
I'm taking a picture. Oh, you're good.
Yeah, get up there.
Yeah, Mayor Kelly.
Okay, nobody move.
Make you get up there. Yeah, you go up there. Okay.
1, 2, 3. Say electricity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know. And then I said, it came back and I said, I'm just going to do it back. It's so funny they have you HA instead of just
Yeah, I think
first
that-
initial because maybe they got two H's.
I don't know. I think that that's what they're maybe doing with the newer people.
Oh, really? Because then I did it with COB.org.
Yeah. So silly that I put Gmail in there. It's
But
like,
this
oh yeah,
has been so
first time.
crazy how you had to start. It's like suddenly like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
anyways, what a time to jump in tonight. Well, and the thing that's annoying, I mean, tonight, most people haven't been to these meetings. I've been going to the climate task force meetings. I've read almost everything on their website. But the people who are complaining and saying, I'm not going to do this, they haven't, they're going to come and they haven't heard any of this stuff. And you're all just overreacting. It's frustrating, because I love Charlie too. It's so funny.
Having the first-hand knowledge and information is so important. It really is, because somebody says something to somebody who translates it to somebody else differently, and all of a sudden, we're ripping everybody's gas stoves out of their
Well, and
house.
then the gas company, and they sent down that link to take everyone out. So it's,
I'm really glad that so many people were here, and so many of these people can then relay that information to others.
I know. No, I mean, I think they did an incredible job. So it's going to be a lot of work to figure out how to do it. Anyways, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Are you having fun yet?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay.
And everyone I talked to was really surprised. I said, one day this really just said, I can't electrify my house. Were you born here? I was born here. He was just feeling that. But I know he thought something had to happen tomorrow.
First meeting. I know.
This was the most uplifting. Well, that's good.
Did we lose April?
I have amendments for the waterfront. I got 10 of them.
No, you don't.
There's stuff to go through.
Okay, we will go ahead and continue with our Committee of the Whole this afternoon. Our second item is a consideration of a package of amendments to the Waterfront District Sub-Area Plan and related documents. The Port of Bellingham has submitted a request for approval of a series of amendments to the 2013 documents that guide redevelopment of the Waterfront District. On October 7th, 2019, the City Council held a public hearing on the proposed amendments, and at the conclusion of the hearing, the Council assigned the matter to the Committee of the Whole for further review. Council reviewed the amendments on October 2nd, 2019 and on November 18th, 2019, and asked staff to address several additional issues at the December 9th meeting today during our work session. Staff have provided responses to the attached memo and will be available to answer those questions. And here to take us through is Planning and Community Development Director Rick Sepler.
Good afternoon, council members. Before I begin to frame the three remaining issues before this body, I'd like to remind the council that we do work on a schedule for our annual amendments. They need to be considered and acted on within a calendar year. You have one calendar year to do that. And this is the second to last meeting of the year. So we'd be looking for direction and action from you so we could finalize the outstanding docket. The second part is that, as noted in memorandums that were provided to you, the Port Commission held a meeting and they have discussed some of the concerns that were raised regarding future environmental standards. That memo was provided to you. Should note that the Port's next meeting of the year is tomorrow. And again, we're sort of coming to an end of a process and have a limited opportunity to conclude matters. So there is a sense of urgency and looking for direction today. With that, as council will recall, there were three key aspects that the council wanted to have additional information on. And I'd like to suggest, if council is amenable, that we posit what we've provided and then council hold discussion on that matter. Once that's concluded, we'll move to the next issue. So we can go through in a timely manner and resolve each of the three. Would that be council's
Any objections
agreement?
on that? Okay, seeing none, that looks good.
Okay. The first was specific to deal with cultural facilities. Council sought specific clarification of what Native American cultural facilities were there. We have proposed revision to the text that's included in your packet. We'd look for council direction on that matter.
Committee, Councilmember Barker.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. And just to bring some folks up to speed that might still be watching from the last, is that cultural facilities oftentimes has a connotation specific to only public. And in this effort, this was really looking at the history of the land, which we've done a great job of honoring the industrial history of the land, but we really have failed to integrate back the natural history of the land and the historical part of the indigenous people that were of this community and still reside in Whatcom County today. And so I'm very supportive, and thank you for taking the time to try to figure that out. The one part I'm just a little bit concerned about is it says these may include projects developed and operated for public use as museums, heritage centers, etc., or facilities operated by tribal partners such as offices and commercial space. That's super important because that was what we were talking about. If it's only public, it means that we do a Native historical museum, but it's operated by the city of Bellingham, which isn't totally traditionally honoring the people unless it's the people who are doing that. So do you think it would make a huge difference to add, so it would say museums, heritage centers, etc., or facilities owned and or operated by the tribal partners, in the sense that they would be able to own that space and or operate it? So I'd make the motion to add owned and or, and then it'd say operated by tribal partners such as offices and commercial space. Yeah.
It's consistent with the purpose and intent of the
Yeah.
staff suggestion.
Thank you. So that's the motion.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Barker, seconded by Councilmember Vargas. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0.
Okay.
Councilmember Barker.
So therefore, I'll move that we adopt the language as amended regarding cultural facilities.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Barker, seconded by Councilmember Knutson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Sorry, go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, I was just curious if we were going to go through all these individually or just approve the motion in one fell swoop. I just want clarity here.
Greg, do you?
Wake up, Uncle Greg.
No, I thought you looked up to respond.
No,
If not, I'm happy to do it.
No, I thought we were going to go through each one
Right.
separately.
Right. I think at this point, we're down to 3 outstanding
Yeah,
matters.
and then we can just pass the whole plan as amended.
And I think just doing the votes on each one gets us to the next.
Yes.
And keeps us focused on task, which I know you'd like to be at this time of day. So moving on to the next one. Council sought clarification on.
Oh, we need to vote on that.
Oh, I'm
a
so
motion,
sorry. Forgive me. I anticipated the vote.
You wanted to move us along. I appreciate that. Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0.
I apologize for jumping the gun, but now I can say, moving on to the Americans with Disabilities Act, we have prepared additional language. It is to note that, as council is aware, in any new proposal, project-specific proposal, we must meet ADA, but specifically, we want to ensure that public boat launches and visitor mortgage complies with that act. We're calling that out on point.
Councilmember Knutson.
Move that language.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Knutson, seconded by Councilmember Vargas. Councilmember Barker.
Well, I just want to thank staff for bringing this forward. And yes, that's usually a given, but we do have beach areas that are not accessible ADA, and we just built one down by the waterfront where some folks, if you are bound to a wheelchair, you wouldn't be able to roll down to the water. So in these opportunities where there are kayaks and other things that conform and are they're not conform, they've been modeled in a way that they can be useful. I think we have to be very direct to say that as we move forward, we want to make sure that folks can access that water and can do it in an ADA accessible way. So I'm supportive of the language, and I'm glad that you specifically called it out.
Councilmember Lillquist.
I do appreciate this, and just to kind of put some sense on here, I once had a real great day in a guided kayak tour.
Mm-hmm.
Our guide doesn't have use of his legs, but he could get down to the beach and he could guide us. So, you know, I don't think Jason's in town anymore, but, you know, people who are in wheelchairs still kayak.
Yeah, motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, members of the council, we now turn to the final matter for consideration on this before a motion to address all the changes in their totality and the plan itself. As councilors will recall, in November 18th, discussion was made regarding standards for sustainability to be placed on the waterfront. Staff's position on this is that there is ongoing work. We just had an hour-and-a-half presentation of a number of changes that would be prompted citywide, and the interest staff would have is to uniformly apply them rather than creating a unique code that would apply to just one portion of town. As such, staff has noted what the Port Commission said on point on this matter, and we recommend at this point the plan be adopted as proposed.
Councilmember Lillquist.
So I brought up this issue, and at this point, I think it's appropriate to make no motion. I think we've left something on the table. What staff and the board are suggesting is that we'll come back and we'll address that matter at a later date. It's not my preferred solution, but I'm not making any motion. I think we just should move on.
Okay.
Second.
Second my no motion.
I think
we don't have to vote.
No, we don't have to vote on
So
that one.
no motion disposes of it.
Okay. Councilmember Vargas.
I'd like to make a motion amending the 2013 Waterfront District Sub-Area Plan be accepted.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Vargas, seconded by Councilmember Boardman. Councilmember Boardman, did you have another?
No, I was going to do the same thing.
Okay, great. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor signify, pardon me, go ahead.
I just want to confirm that it's assuming the amended text, because we made all the motions prior. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, thank you. Next, third item this afternoon is consideration of a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a modification of the Waterfront District Development Agreement with the Port of Bellingham. City and the Port entered into a development agreement for the Waterfront District in 2013. Modifications to the Waterfront District Sub-Area Plan and related documents and other changes in the Waterfront District that have occurred since 2013 necessitated modifications to the development agreement. And here to take us through is Tara Sundin.
Good afternoon, Tara Sundin, Planning and Community Development Department. At the hearing, I explained the various roles that the city has with regards to the Waterfront District. But just as a reminder, what you just took action on is something that the city is very familiar with. We do master plans, we have a comprehensive plan and regulations. And now that you have passed those on, we're going to turn to the development agreement. And the development agreement is between the City of Bellingham, originally entered into between the City of Bellingham and the Port, but it also transfers to successors in interest. So those that come and purchase property are bound to this agreement as well. And really, for the most part, the agreement is a vesting document. And that's predominantly what's changing here is just saying, okay, now that because right now they're vested to the old rules of 2013. Now, since they've been changed, we want them vested to these rules in this plan. The term, we also made a clarification on the term of the agreement and changed that section so it's date specific. It's for the same term, 25 years from 2013, and updated a few of the exhibits. The council's raised no issues with the development agreement, and so we recommend that you approve.
Councilmember Lillquist.
So going back to the issue we just disposed of about the citywide development regulations, I direct your attention to section 1.4. It talks about divesting to current development regulations. And the city hereby reserves authority to oppose new and different regulations relating to port properties to the extent they are required by serious threat and public health and safety. I just want to make sure that the port's interest in us potentially doing citywide changes to our ordinances really will apply to the port.
So I've brought this to Kurt Navafeld as well, and Kurt has been very clear that it will be any new regulations on how things are built are going to fall into a building code. And so they are not, nobody's vested. We haven't vested anybody to the building code in this document. It's just land use.
Councilmember Knudsen.
Move approval. Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Knudsen, seconded by Councilmember Lillquist. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Our fourth item this afternoon is consideration of an update to the interlocal agreement for facilities with the Port of Bellingham for the Waterfront District. The city and the port entered into an interlocal agreement for the Waterfront District in 2013, modifications to the Waterfront Sub-Area Plan and related documents, and other changes in the Waterfront District have occurred since 2013, and that necessitated modification to the interlocal agreement. And again, here to take us through is Tara Sundin.
Thank you. This agreement is just between the City of Bellingham and the Port of Bellingham. It doesn't transfer to successors in interest. This is primarily a financial agreement. It's setting out the city's financial commitments in infrastructure and parks predominantly. And there are some requirements that we bring back major modification to you for your approval. And that's if any of the changes impact the location of those facilities, which is why we're bringing this back to you, or financial changes. We've made sure that we've honored our financial commitment and we're not increasing it with these changes, or the timing. So really the reason we're bringing this back to you is
The location of parks and roads have changed since the original plan. There's no change to the term, there's no change to the financial commitment. The biggest changes are the Bay Street connector is replacing Commercial Street Bridge, and we call it Waypoint Park Connection. We need to work on our naming of parks at some point. That goes through the site, completely through the site now. Replaces Commercial Street Green. Those are the primary changes.
Councilmember Lillquist.
So when we approved the waterfront plan, this was the scariest document for me because this is the one that really commits us to things, and I think it committed us to some wrong things. Commercial Street, that was a mistake. Bay Street is a much better solution. It's still the scariest thing in here. It's still $33 million is what we are obligating the city to do. It's one of the single largest public works projects the city will be engaged in, except for, of course, the sewage treatment plant, which is bigger than everything else. So, I mean, this really is still my scariest document, and I don't know, I guess I want to highlight what it is we're doing, the amount of commitment we're making for that. And in a lot of the pretty pictures, I think the impression is that those big buildings and that big connector is going to go up on Harcourt or whoever the developer's dime is, or the port's dime. Most of that big pretty picture, the expensive stuff over the railroad right-of-way, that's us. That's $33 million. So I wanted to highlight that. That's the thing which scares me, and I'm going to vote for it.
Councilmember Vargas and then Knutson.
Michael, that's a great point. But I do believe without the Bay Street connector, we won't be connected to our waterfront, and that is the part that has been a concern for people for many years, is it being a separate entity. And I think that the redesign of it and the way it looks now has shown that we are being very thoughtful on how we proceed. And so I think it's a critical part of our success with the waterfront.
Councilmember Knutson.
Move approval. And
Second.
just to make Michael feel better, maybe 50 years from now it'll be called Lillquist Lane. I mean, who knows? I don't know. Just thought it.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Knutson and seconded by Councilmember Lillquist. Any further discussion? I just want to just quickly chime in here. I agree with Councilmember Vargas that I'm the Ward 3 representative. That means that we're in Ward 3 right now. And the waterfront and the downtown, I don't ever want to be competitors with each other. I want both to thrive. I moved here in 1989, and when I moved here, it was the year after the mall went in, and downtown was like a ghost town. It was not the place you'd want to take your child in a stroller, at any time, I think. But now it is. It's a place where it's very vibrant, and there's a lot of activity down there. And I want to make sure that that connector does that. It does exactly that we connect with the waterfront, and that it's a fairly fluid and seamless transition. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. I have November 18th committee meeting minutes for approval. Motion's been made by Councilmember Knutson and seconded by Councilmember Barker. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Items for old and new. Okay. That's, I think it is the first. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and read executive session items. Litigation, Smith versus City of Bellingham and Brooks Laughlin. This is by Brady, approximately 20 minutes. Second item is potential property acquisition. This is with Stamps, and this is approximately 5 minutes. I will come back and adjourn at approximately 3:50.